You want your team rowing in the same direction, yet you keep changing that direction all the time. And ultimately, the team doesn't know how to keep up with those changes, especially as you're hiring fast or as things are changing fast. And we all want to be agile, but when is agile too agile? And when are we not thinking about the fact that we're demotivating our people and actually keeping them from doing the best work of their lives? That's the conversation I got a chance to have today with Hannah Clark. She is the editor at theproductmanager.com and host of the Product Manager podcast. And she gets an opportunity to see perspectives of lots of different startup product managers at different levels of organizations dealing with this rate of change, this shiny object syndrome challenge that comes down from leaders, the lack of collaboration when you're fully remote or in hybrid. And ultimately, this pace of change is what's causing us to be tired, worn out, demotivated, and ultimately burnout. I think you're really going to love this conversation. So let's jump right in. Hannah, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to just pass it straight to you. Why don't you give a little bit of an introduction to yourself and tell the world who you are?
Sure. Thanks, George. Excited to hang out. So I'm Hannah Clark. I am the editor and content strategist for theproductmanager.com, but I think a lot of folks probably know me as the host of the Product Manager podcast. And we are basically a resource to help product managers and product people get better at what they do, fine tune their game, and just win at work in so many ways. So that's what I'm doing.
I love that. I love that. Well, there's a little bit of crossover in our worlds because we're often talking to similar type of audience, but you get a unique perspective. You get to see into all different types of companies and different conversations. What are some of the things that you're running into, or what are some of the things you're thinking about now that you've had lots of these conversations with product people?
Right. So I can't help but think when I talk to folks in different companies, a lot of the folks that I talk to are in scale ups. They're in kind of a growth stage startup area of maturity. And I have a lot of experience with that as well. I've worked in a lot of businesses that are kind of at that point where they're adding new people to the team. They're scaling really rapidly. And something that I've really kind of cottoned on to is that there seems to be this kind of a disconnect in terms of how we operate as when we're developing products versus when we're managing people. And specifically, one of the things that I've noticed is that when a startup is in a kind of an early stage, everything is very iterative. It's very, we're thinking about things in such an agile way. We're trying to get to an MVP. We're trying to find product market fit, and we're moving really fast. And that approach works for people management also to a point. And then there's a point at scale where that we kind of outgrow that approach when it comes to people management specifically, where the boat just gets too large to turn around that fast. And I just see that there's a lot of challenges that kind of come along with that fraught period of time. So that's kind of what I'm nerding out right now.
Okay, so this is interesting because I have in the past about my company has said, I look at my service company, which is a very people first organization where really at the end of the day, we're billing out hours, right? I have said we should think about Crema like we think about our products, right? That we're agile, we're iterative, we're always ready to evolve and adapt. Now, to be fair, we're only about 30 to 60 people at our biggest. So maybe we haven't hit those thresholds. Where are you seeing people kind of hit those thresholds of either change pace or company size where it doesn't work anymore to kind of say like, hey, we're scrappy, we're just going to figure it out and keep rolling with it?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to there's a point at which there's a new it seems to be and this is every team is so nuanced, so it's really hard to generalize. But what I've noticed is that when we're at a point where a department is adding a new person, let's say once a month or once every couple of weeks, or maybe a couple of people every month, that's when it gets really difficult to disseminate information in a really methodical way and also document information because things change so fast. So you have all this documentation that is partially owned. It's partially exists in someone's head that's being passed on as like an oral tradition. And then there's a certain element of documentation that usually exists in most organizations that may or be complete, may be up to date, but generally is not, and is changing so quickly that it's really difficult to update the backlog. And then you have people who are coming on and getting onboarded at different paces where, some people maybe are 2 months into their journey. Some people are a couple weeks. Some people are about a year. and everybody has a sort of a different understanding of what the culture of the organization is around like passing information along. So there's a little bit of breakdown that happens there. Um, and then there's also the matter of how rapidly projects get deployed. So we have, maybe there's an initiative that we get a little bit of steam and everyone kind of feels like they're on the same page and they kind of feel like they're getting some momentum. And then sometimes, something happens, a trend, I don't know, maybe AI, and then suddenly everything changes and everyone's priority is interrupted and we have to suddenly change pace and kind of relearn how to do our jobs, and this can happen frequently. So we're kind of working with different levels of information, different levels of onboarding,
Mm.
coupled with different levels of momentum, and being interrupted during that iterative process that can kind of cause, we start to see the signs of burnout. We start to see the signs of feeling like, what's going on? I don't really know my job. We're starting to lose track of the vision of the company and those kinds of things that kind of create a domino effect throughout the organization.
So what I'm hearing is there's a couple different factors there. There is the kind of onboarding, which then it's interesting. I think I get what you're saying. We've worked with companies before because they talked about their onboarding classes. And like you
Mm.
said, it'd be like every 2 weeks they were onboarding 20, 30 people at a time sometimes. I mean, like huge, massive growth. And I can see how that would start to compound. Maybe you get the person that was there with the original team or maybe an early stage team and they kind of get it. They're like, whatever, we're just going to keep moving forward. We know what we do. But then all these new people are trying to get a sense of who am I? How do I fit into this thing? What matters? Where are we going? Why are we
Mhm.
going there? Can we change it? Can we do something
Mhm.
different? And then like you said, so you've got this cultural dynamic that's in flux or in change. Then you get the product dynamic that gets in flux and change because you got all these new perspectives, people wanting to kind of make a name for themselves when they come on the team. How how can anybody navigate this? How can you even address it? Because this seems like it's just what happens. Deal with it.
Well, it is what happens, and I think that that's one of the things is we have to be so aware that this is almost an inevitability and kind of curb this proactively. Because actually, one of the things that kind of stuck out with the conversation I had with you not too long ago, we kind of talked a little bit about how usually when there's an issue with someone's job or a process that is unclear, people just kind of figure it out. They sort of MacGyver their way through and they kind of find a hack. And I think that kind of hack mentality is great when you're in a really small team that is tasked with kind of taking things into your own hands and kind of owning your piece. But then when it comes down to, you're working with a team, you're trying to collaborate, and especially in a remote context where you don't really have purview into what's happening in other people's, home cubicles, that hacking mentality tends to come at the expense of collaboration and communication and disseminating that information effectively. So the way that things get handled if you don't address that issue proactively is that people really start to scatter in even more of their own direction. And you kind of have this team that's a little bit disjointed and maybe a little disenfranchised and a little bit distrustful of leadership if they haven't really addressed the issue proactively adequately.
Hmm.
So as far as like what I would say is maybe an approach to consider to counteract the effects of this
Yeah.
is to be very measured and strategic and deliberate about systems that you put in place to keep people working at a steady pace. So what I mean by that is, things like the project management toolkit, really like Gantt charts, those kinds of things that really, really communicate clearly to the team, like specifically what the milestones need to be. And, the roadmap, that's what that's all about. But I think that there tends to be, as projects gets more fragmented and teams get more fragmented as well, people start to do things on their own and find processes and ways to do their job that kind of gets them further away from the team dynamic. And so that's something, and I think that's something that is so nuanced that everyone sort of has to find like the solution that works for their team, just with the mind of like, we really can't be herding cats here. It's
Yeah.
it's counterproductive.
Well, and so I hear you saying is it's both a tooling factor. So we can think about, how do you manage your backlog? How do you manage
Mhm.
your work to be done? What does your roadmap look like? How far ahead are we looking? Those are
Mhm.
those are some aspects of it. And then the ceremonies or the processes to support that, right? So it sounds like there's a need to kind of create at least some level of consistency. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that when you keep changing both the product and the team because we're hiring and the processes around the team all the time, then it's just always chaos.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that one of the things that we like to believe as people who embrace the agile mindset is that we can take as much change as is thrown at us. We're infinitely adaptable. And that's just not really
Mm,
realistic. Most people thrive on a combination of variety and habits
yeah.
and systems. So when we really think about the work week, when we think about even like most individual contributors' work weeks, ideally should not look completely different every week. It should be there should be some variety. There should be room to take on experiments. There should be room to try new things and take a departure from your usual. But really, um, there is something to be said about consistency and predictability in terms of keeping momentum on in any project that you're working on.
Yeah, this is interesting. I feel a little bit like you might be talking directly to me as a leader of my organization because I'll be honest, my team has directly called me out. Now we have a pretty open feedback culture, so I want this and I've asked for it, but the team has literally said, George, you can't bring up a new idea every day. Right? You can't come up with a new way to do things or a new tool that we should all be using every single day.
Mhm.
So ultimately, what we had to do is we had to figure out, okay, what are the things that work? And how do we keep doing those things? So, for example, we do value stand-ups. Now we've done them in different ways. We've done them as Slack stand-ups. We've done them as actual physical stand-ups. We've done them as huddle calls or whatever, or retrospectives. Like we value a retrospective no less than every 2 weeks. Or backlog grooming. Because we're doing client services, it's like we must groom the backlog with the client every week or 2 weeks. And so these rhythms of these are non-negotiables. This stuff
Mhm.
has to happen. At least creates a base layer for us, I think. And I think
Very
that's
much.
what you're talking about is like,
Yeah.
what's the base layer? You can have adaptation and you have to be agile with your products. Products
Mhm.
have to iterate in order to find best use for our users. But at
Yeah.
least if you don't experiment with everything all the time.
That's exactly it. Like I think that we have this mindset sometimes where let's say the format of a stand up, even like or any kind of ritual that we engage in, sometimes we just don't need to iterate on things that are working. Like
I'm
sometimes
I'm okay. I'm accepting this fact. Keep going. Keep going. I'm getting there.
Yeah, because these kinds of rituals become the scaffolding for how your team functions. They become almost like the backbone of the organization where there's a predictable. It's kind of like the old everybody likes to talk about how Steve Jobs he had the same outfit that he wore every day, and for him it was like that's one less decision that I have to make.
To
You
sure.
kind of reduce that decision fatigue.
Yeah.
It's I think applies a little bit to change fatigue as well. Like when we think about all the decisions that have to be made, and even just like wrapping your head around how a ritual has changed and then
Mm,
having to adopt a new process when the old one was like kind of doing the same thing. Like you're not really making a meaningful change, but you are interrupting people's momentum. You are changing people's focus. You are adding another layer of decision making and um, unpredictability into a space that is already rife with that stuff.
yeah.
So, it's kind of like I feel like there's an element of picking your battles where if there are things that you can keep consistent that help people to feel like there is that scaffolding to their week, that's really actually helping your business a lot.
How much do you think that documentation plays into this? So this is something that we've been working on, and we have our clients do actually. They'll steal this from us occasionally. Is this idea of write it down, right, or document it in some way? It could be a video, so you might have some
Mhm.
course training. This can be really important if you are onboarding quickly. But how much do you think that documentation goes into that? So whether it's a Notion doc or a knowledge base or an e-course or something, how much of that do you see people use as ways to kind of normalize some of this work?
So in our organization, we use Slight, and it's really helpful to keep as much as possible documented in sort of like this company Bible almost,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you're documenting as many things as possible. And we really try to encourage everyone in the culture to update things in Slight, keep things on in Slight. I think a lot of the time, it's sort of a double edged sword. There's a lot of stuff that gets missed in documentation, And it tends to get deprioritized because, generally speaking, we're so focused on the deliverable that we're not really thinking about the or it's a very much an afterthought. Or we might put things into the documentation that's kind of like, here's my working draft, or just copy this. This is what I did. And that's, well, it's better than nothing.
Mhm.
I think where the challenge really comes in is, how do we actually make sure that people are consuming the documentation who need it? There tends to be, I'd say, not a lot of companies have a strong or onboarding process.
Yeah.
Tends to stand out when they do, and actually, that's something that we've gotten some compliments on when I've talked to new employees. They're like, "Yeah, I really found that the onboarding really stuck out to me," and I agree. Like, coming onto the organization, I found that it was worlds ahead, and I know, talking to a lot of folks, we tend to be a little bit loose with the onboarding when there really is a time and opportunity to be more structured.
Yeah.
But onboarding is a perpetual thing. Like, we're never really in an organization that's changing constantly. We're never done onboarding. So how do we continue to upskill ourselves with the general know-how on the company all the time? And I think that comes down to being really purposeful with that when we're doing cross-functional meetings, or when we're doing um, when we're talking about things in kind of like any kind of a ceremony perspective, or even just trying to take time or make it part of the culture to review documentation at certain
Yeah.
intervals, which is, it's a tall ask, right? No one really likes to go back and read through documentation, but sometimes there's things that get missed. And even the way that sorry, I'm going to kind of go on a little bit of a rant here.
Great.
um Sometimes I think what we also forget about in documentation is that the way that we document has such an impact on how it's going to be consumed. And we
Mm.
don't really talk about how we structure documentation for the end user, which is the people that we're going to be depending on every day. So, when we kind of coming back to that first issue, it is better to have some documentation than none. That's kind of like your bare minimum. Having a document that's thorough, that's like middle, that's like, okay, that's pretty good. Great documentation should be developed in and should be culturally, it should be an expected standard that it is developed for the purpose of people being able to consume that information effectively and quickly. So when we're, when you think about creating, say you've developed a process to do something specific, and that it's going to become part and parcel of whoever is carrying the torch in your team, or the next person, whatever.
Mhm.
When we think about how content is formatted on the web, how it's really, we read through a blog post and we know exactly how it's supposed to be managed, and there's usually a table of contents, and we can usually, it's formatted. We have a TLDR a lot of the time.
Mhm.
That is almost always missing from documentation internally. But we really have to be thinking about almost like our own onboarding materials and the way that we pass along information, very similarly to how we pass on information on social media and on the web, and the ways that we communicate with our customers. Because internally, we're all internal customers as well. But I see that completely missing from the conversation in terms of like, how are we developing employees internally, is like, how are we ensuring that the materials that our team is producing is going to work for the people who are coming on after them.
I think this is really important. We had this has been a little while back, but we had Aaron Dignan on, and he owns a consultancy out in Denver called The Ready, and then he wrote a book
Mhm.
called A Brave New Work, which is really, really, I recommend it to our listeners. But one of the things he talks about is what they refer to as team charters.
Mm.
So, like, this could be onboarding documentation. This could be, hey, we're going to try doing something a different way. But before they even move forward with a change, they all have to write it out. They have to have the TLDR, right, version of it, so they can all kind of go like, can we chew on this? Can like we sell it basically? Can you sell it
Mhm.
to your peers really fast? And then ultimately, it needs to be time bound, because there has to be we said we were going to do this thing. Did we
Mhm.
give it long enough to make sure that the change meant something, or did we allow it ourselves to iterate on it when it was appropriate? Now
Mhm.
that's hard when we go back to the first thing you talked about, which is that rapid onboarding.
Mhm.
We're bringing people on. But if you have these charters where they can go in and say TLDR, TLDR,
Mhm.
TLDR, here's the team charter, here's what it means to work with these folks in this way, it's a really
Mhm.
powerful asset, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of the time, especially when people are coming on board, they really are afraid of making mistakes, and they should be. A lot of the time, you're just tossed into the fire.
Yeah.
So it's comforting to have resources that go into depth. But to kind of dig into a really in-depth document, like a process document, going in blind without some kind of like a high-level view, it's
Mhm.
intimidating and it's difficult to digest. And that's the reason that a lot of the time when you have, let's see, if you search something on Google and the first result is just going to give you a wall of text, you're going to navigate away. You'll probably watch a YouTube video or whatever. You're going to find some way to kind of what's the broad strokes quickly,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to find out independently what I need to know, based on what I can't put together on my own from that kind of short, high level view. So yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on documentation. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is one of the things I think we neglect when we talk about onboarding in a rapid pace.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so let's move past the documentation then, because I think that is it, again it's just a tool, right? These are
Mhm.
tools that can help us to do this better. What are other things that you either see or have seen from your own company, or as you're talking to folks, you go, "That's interesting. I maybe we haven't fully lived that out, or I haven't fully seen it, but little tips or tricks that you're seeing people do that are
Mhm.
helping them to do this better."
Yeah, I think, I mean, one thing that sticks out to me is the one of the things that's great, you kind of talked about your experience as a founder and like, jumping on new things all the time. And I think that's the wonderful thing about founders is that, we're looking at what can we do that's going to be an advantage to the business, that's going to get people excited, that's going to add some variety, that's possibly going to be the next great new thing. At the same time, there is sort of a cost to pursuing a lot of those opportunities when it comes at the expense of another initiative that's already underway. And I think sometimes we fail to really evaluate this initiative that's in progress that
Mhm.
I'm planning on deprioritizing in service of something else.
Right.
There is a significant cost, not just in terms of the fact that we are not going to pursue the opportunity that we already have underway in service of this other one, um, but it's on a few levels. There's the loss of momentum from the folks who are like so close to the finish line and now they're being told, okay, we're going to kneecap this, we're going to pursue this other, we're going to go in a totally different direction. Okay, so that's demoralizing, honestly. And then that kind of robs people of their excitement for the next thing. There's also the time lost because same as the whole idea of context switching when we're trying to go from say a meeting to deep work, that there's a time that is spent just changing direction, and that time gets expanded when we're talking about something that's a little bit more high level, like a pretty in-depth, a project that a lot of people are working on in tandem. When we're switching direction, inevitably there's going to be processes that we have to refine and adjust in order to accommodate the new requirements that we're pursuing. There's going to be different communication. There's going to be getting everybody aligned all over again and getting everyone situated and feeling like they've found their groove again, which takes a lot of time as well. There's the lost opportunity of whatever we were going to do that might have actually been very successful,
Mm.
and we will never know. And then there's also you're kind of robbing folks of seeing through, getting that like reward for the work that they've done. Okay, I did all this stuff, I had some momentum, and I don't get to see the results of that. And then that, it's kind of, and then there's that kind of comes back to the other cost of trust in leadership, where in which it's like, okay, this was so important to you a month ago or 2 months ago. We've come this far, and now something else is much more important to you. What's to tell me that now, 2 months from here, when I feel like I've hit my groove, something else isn't going to catch your eye, and then I'm going to have to abandon ship again? How can I invest the same level of excitement and emotional investment in what I'm doing now when if you keep getting your heart broken, it's hard to trust again.
Yeah.
Um, so
What I hear is this is a challenge of trust though, right?
there is.
I mean, I think that what you're talking about, and I love Reid Hoffman's definition of trust is consistency over time,
Mhm.
right? And so if you well, and you can build trust in the wrong directions too. I can trust that you're just going to change all the time, so why try, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
or I can trust that you're going to give this the amount of time it needs to see it through.
Mhm.
Or I can, this relationship between leadership trying to make decisions, and I can empathize with leaders. I am one, but also I can empathize with individual contributors because that's basically what Crema provides to our clients. And
Mhm.
so what's interesting is that I as the shiny object guy, I'm that person. I admit to it, fully admit to it, is it's driven in some ways by excitement and interest and curiosity and intrigue, but it's actually driven a lot by fear, right?
Mm,
Because I'm afraid that if I maybe the thing we're doing today won't be relevant tomorrow.
mm,
Or maybe if we keep going down this path and we go too far and it doesn't get product market fit, then we've wasted all this time and money. So I better hedge my bets, right?
mm,
Or maybe this other thing has more legs and I just didn't see it until now. And so how do I? So I'm curious. Maybe you haven't. I don't know if you've seen how people can. I need advice. This is what I'm asking for. Is how does one handle the tension between understanding that things are going to change, things need to change sometimes, but
mm.
ultimately holding that balance of giving it enough time and space to breathe and sink in and take root.
Yeah, I think it has to do with, have you even reached before you deprioritize an initiative, have you reached the point at which you really have a measurable result? Are you at a point where you have enough information about what you've been doing to say whether or not it will or won't be successful? Um, because
Yeah.
if you've built that momentum and your team is excited about it, and it's going to, it could be a great thing. And I mean, when you think about the cost that I mentioned, losing that momentum, losing that energy, losing that excitement, if people are that invested in something, they usually will give you their best work.
Yeah.
And so to kind of trust the process a little bit and to get to the point where you actually have some basis to say, you know what, this was a learning opportunity. We learned, we tried our best, it didn't hit, moving on. Or, you know what, actually this was and we almost deprioritized this because of this other thing, which also, for all could have totally sank. So I think there's something about allowing things the space to breathe so that you know for sure that it's worth deprioritizing well before you have, only the early results, or, oh, I'm scared, I don't know that it's going to work. Um, and I get that. And I think that there's like a certain element of fear that kind of ties into this plan procrastination
Hmm.
thing, where it's like it's so easy to plan and plan and plan and not execute. And I think sometimes the fear kind of crops up when we're just at the point where we're about to execute, and it's like, oh no, if we do something else that's maybe more successful,
Yeah.
that'll be better. Well, how will we know?
Let's take a break to tell you about our sponsor this week, Crema, a design and technology consultancy. At Crema, we know that navigating through periods of rapid change and scaling can be daunting. Broken systems, misaligned teams, delivery delays, and gaps in customer engagement are just some of the challenges that can arise when growing like this. That's where Crema steps in. Crema acts as a trusted partner, helping you overcome these hurdles on your journey to becoming a tech-enabled organization. Crema is excited to announce 3 new services designed to empower your product teams. You may have heard of the product triangle: design, product, and technology. Well, we're excited to help you navigate all 3. First is our UX audit. This isn't just a review, it's a deep dive into the user experience to uncover transformative insights that serve as a blueprint for greater success. Next is our team assessment. This service helps you identify the strengths and gaps in your product team, arming you with the knowledge to excel. And finally, a code quality assessment. It's essential to ensure that your technology is not just working, but thriving. Our experts will enhance your code base to improve performance, security, and scalability. Ready to get the most out of your existing product teams? Visit crema.us today and learn how Crema's new services can help you navigate your biggest challenges. Now back to the show. I like what you're saying too about the motivation and kind of momentum that you see between a really empowered team, right?
Mm,
Um, I've I've spent the last 15 years trying to really, I think I could say I love product, I love technology, I love design, I love UX. What
mhm.
I really love is building teams.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when you see a team that's working really, really, really well together, and they believe in the mission, vision, values of where we're going, they believe in the potential of the product that we're building, that all starts to lock in. You're absolutely right that robbing them of the momentum is one of the worst things you can do. And I think that if anybody's listening right now, that is a huge piece of advice, is just think about, okay, what will you be robbing from this really effective, really motivated team if you shift gears or shift perspective or pivot massively just because? Now, if you
Hmm.
have data to back it up, or if you have really validated reasons to do so, or maybe you're being forced to do so, there is that factor. Okay, we're adaptive. We'll figure it out. That is when we become agile. But don't do it just for the sake of doing it, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, don't do it just for the sake. So, like the grass sometimes is greener on the other side. If we're
Sure.
talking about a huge opportunity, or let's say there's a like a layoff, if, for example.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are circumstances where the realities of the team have changed measurably. You are working with fewer resources for one reason or other. That's a situation in which, yeah, adaptation is compulsory. We have to do it, and the team will rally together because they understand that this is the reality of things. This is kind of the cards that were dealt. The right people, if you have the right people on the bus, they're going to go in the right direction. They're going to come together, and you'll get a pretty good result, generally speaking. Um, but if folks feel that they the projects that they're invested in aren't really being, it's almost like flippant, where we're kind of like, oh, well, this is what is on his mind today, who knows what's coming next, like that's the kind of stuff that kind of comes up in people's mind, and no one wants to be that toxic person. But at
Yeah.
the point where they feel tempted to be like, well, this is what we're doing now, but who knows, then and you might have an issue on your hands.
Well, I think that some things that as being on both sides of that equation,
Yeah.
I think one thing that is a gift is the feedback, right?
Mhm.
Is having someone come and tell you, "Hey, this is how I experience the way that your shiny object syndrome plays out."
Mhm.
Sometimes it's really great for us. A lot of times it's really just a massive distraction and we're not able to see things through, so we're demotivated or we're burnout. And I think just having that open conversation is maybe a really good first start. I'll just self-admittedly, I would say I would recommend that. It's hard. It may not land great the first time, but if you can plant the seed, I think
Yeah.
that's really important. Being on the other side, being on the other side.
Yeah, I think, and I think feedback is one of those great frontiers of modern work culture that we're really starting to get right finally, but it is such a mindset switch for a lot of
Mhm.
leaders specifically. I really am interested in the topic of psychological safety in the workplace, and this is an area where I think it's just so valuable, but it's very, very difficult because, if you're a founder, especially, this is your baby. This is, and it's very tempting. I've been on the side of this as well. It's very tempting to believe that because you come this far, your judgment is pretty good and you're probably infallible. Um, but people, what's that? Yeah, yeah. But ICs who are close to the work see things differently. They have a perspective that's very valid, and a lot of the time, when you actually hear feedback, it might sound like someone's probably trying to disguise it like, oh, it's just an idea that I had. They've probably been festering on that for a long time. It takes a lot of courage to look your boss in the eyes and say, I don't think that we're doing this right. So to honor that and just to kind of give that weight, like, yeah, this person would not be there's there sometimes is the complainer in the group, and usually the reason that they're the complainer is because they have a very short threshold for letting things fester, and you actually want to have that person on your team because they're the person who's going to let you know exactly when it's an issue. But it's a tough pill to swallow.
I was recently talking to another founder friend of mine who he said that anytime he has a new idea, he takes it to that complainer on his team first.
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh, that's brutal."
Mhm.
Like, but he said, "Honestly, they're gonna give me the feedback anyways, probably before
Yeah.
anybody else. So I might as well get their feedback. And I may not agree with it. I might not even do anything with it, but to know that's what's gonna come out immediately, then
Mhm.
we can get ahead of it." And oftentimes he finds that then that person buys in better to,
Yes.
okay, now we can shape this together rather than it just being me saying, "Go do this other thing."
Yeah.
I think that's really, really good.
Yeah, I would fully agree because that person, um, you have to think about the motivations of the people on your team too. Like the complainer on the team, generally speaking, they really want the best for everybody.
That's right.
They're
Yeah.
they're they really are looking out for the
Mhm.
collective. They're like, this is BS. I think that this is something that we could be doing better. They're usually pretty problem solve adept.
Yeah.
So to have that person, but the flip side of that is that person knows that they're bringing value to the table. And if they feel like they're not being taken seriously, they can, in some cases, become a little bit of a poison on the team because they
Yeah.
often will also let the resentment show very fast as well. So
Yeah.
to bring that person in and to see that, yeah, I value your opinion and I need you to help me shape this direction, provided that they're a sound thinker in other respects. I think that's a good strategy.
It feels to me so. This is something that I'm realizing the longer I've been in, I guess, an adult. I don't know. I can't say it's just business. I think it feels like it's this way in life too. Is this ability to hold the tensions, right?
Mhm.
We need to adapt. We need to be agile, but also build the foundations that are going to make people have that consistency that they can expect and trust.
Mhm.
We need to hear the naysayer, but also don't let the naysayer become the toxic member of the organization that's going to ruin you, right?
Mhm.
We need to try new things, but also give the things that you're working on enough time that it doesn't burn people out and that you can prove that you're making the right steps. All it's this give and take, it's this tension all the time.
The yin and yang of leadership. Yeah, that's totally true. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious, as you're exploring this and this you've been exploring this topic and you're talking to lots of people about this. We've talked a lot about how it can go wrong and where people do it inconsistently. Have you seen any areas where they're just missing the mark of they're trying to do it better, or they're
Mm.
trying to move this in the right direction, but they keep tripping over it. It's just not quite there yet. Is whether it's again the tooling or the teams or the processes or this idea of inviting in perspectives. Where do you see people struggling to get it right?
That's a good question. I think, I mean, I think to some extent, any startup that's been in the position where they've been fortunate enough to be able to scale rapidly is probably in that situation to some extent. There's probably things that they're getting right that their team really values, and there's probably some things that they're not quite there yet. Um, so it's difficult to generalize. I would say, generally speaking, I mean, the shiny object syndrome thing it's a difficult one to rein in because I recognize that there's so many influences when you're in a founder mindset of, I want to do something that's good for the business. Maybe there's the element of fear. Maybe there's also, table stakes from competitors, an economic landscape, things that you feel are going to protect your business from having to be that guy who has to lay off a bunch of people. There's so many other factors that can drive decisions that kind of err into the area of shiny object syndrome. And I think that this is something that is very it kind of comes with the tides. I've definitely seen from my own perspective, having gone through the pandemic and worked for businesses in this kind of mindset, that tends to be intensified when there's external factors at play. So the shiny object syndrome goes off the charts when there's things like, rampant job insecurity, or there's like, AI, oh, it's taking over. We have to be an AI company. Or, and some kind of an external factor that increases the panic level and makes you feel that there's a lot more to lose. And often cases there is.
There can be,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I think there's kind of maybe the advice there is to kind of be your own therapist and kind of think
Mm,
about things, take a step back, like what are the factors that are influencing my decision making in this moment? Is it
mm.
all because of the actual reality of what's going on in my business, or is it external factors that are putting artificial pressure on the situation when things actually aren't going so bad? Um, so maybe there's a little bit of keeping that in check. That's really only you in that position can do. Um, and then as far as other things that people get, I mean, we talked a lot about documentation. I don't want to beat that horse. Um, but I think that also collaboration is something that we aren't quite getting right as
Mm.
largely remote organizations. This is a
Ooh, say
whole
more.
different,
Say more. This is a bigger topic. We got to watch our time, but I want
I
you to go
know.
there. So say more.
So this is remote teams are a blessing and a curse. They're a new thing for a lot of organizations. Some have been around long enough to have gotten it pretty well dialed in. Most have not.
Mm.
So, I think that we all really want to be super collaborative. We all want to be in each other's businesses. We all want to be working as a team. Almost never does that happen. Oftentimes we're kind of working, maybe, you know, if you're a PM working with a product team, you might be working a little bit more collaboratively than most. But a lot of the times, the folks on that team are not running every decision by every person. They're kind of in their own headspace. They're maybe in their own work environment. They're doing a lot of things independently. And at least the teams that I've personally been on, we tend to kind of get wrapped up in what are other people who do my job doing, and not so
Mhm.
much what is the actual, like when we think about our team. For sure I've been in the situation a few times where I think about my team as the other people who have the same job title as me, but actually my team are the people who are doing trying to get the same outcome as me. And so we kind of have to reframe sometimes, and that's a difficult thing to get right too, because it's again that yin and yang. What's the right level of communication where it doesn't feel like I'm in a meeting every second of the day, but it also feels like I'm in touch with everybody, where we're kind of all moving in the same direction and we're kind of in lockstep. Um, and that really takes a very, very, very good people manager to get that correct. Like I can't say enough about the skill set of management is not the same as just being a really good individual contributor. It's a real art. Um, so there's something about that, but I think that everybody, if you are an IC and you feel like I'm kind of calling you out, that might be something to watch. Is, am I really doing as much as I could to collaborate with the folks who are trying to achieve the same outcome as me, and not just the people who are doing the same thing I am.
Super good. And I think you're right. There's some companies that have figured it out and they seem to
Mhm.
know how to manage it.
Mhm.
I think most are still struggling. I'll be honest. I mean, almost every conversation I have, whether it's hybrid or fully remote or trying to make a decision on do we RTO, all the things are led back to this, actually back to kind of full circle what we were talking about at the beginning, which is this challenge of you're trying to bring people together to do a thing, right? And
Mhm.
ultimately, when those people are now completely isolated, but together, then you have to have tools and documentation and processes over indexed to kind of make up for what maybe would have been early days tacit knowledge, right? Just the
Mhm.
shared knowledge because you were in the same space, you could hear people over there talking about it, you could walk by it and kind of address the issue. And that doesn't exist in the same way as it used to.
Mhm.
And although transparently, I totally wish it did. I mean, I wish we
Mhm.
could go back to that. But I don't think we're fully going to go back to that. And so, I think you're absolutely right that the intentionality that has to be done from a people management perspective of making sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction.
Mhm.
Oh man, it's so hard to get right. And
Mhm.
when it does work, celebrate it. Right when it doesn't,
Yeah.
work on it.
Well, and yeah, again, full circle. That I think comes a lot down to some of those processes and structures that we have in place. That scaffolding we talked about earlier is as many things as you can make predictable and systemic in your organization, where people know where they're on point. They know kind of that the base level responsibilities, the base level tasks that they have to do, especially the recurring ones. Any way that you can reduce the decision making and chaos in someone's life, it makes it so much easier to add in
Mhm.
those things, like we have to come together, and really talk about what are our specific deliverables that we're going to contribute on what timeline, benchmarked. Like those kinds of things sound like over management sometimes, but actually I think that those constraints really breed a lot of creativity. I'm a big believer in creativity, born of constraints. When you give
Absolutely.
people, yeah, when you give people a set box of, these are the things that have to get done, these are the tasks that have to be done, and when, and you're able to kind of get the team with those marching orders, and then where they know exactly there's not a lot of room for trying to, what am I doing, what am I, how do I figure this out, then that's when people really are able to deliver their best work, and they have that kind of space without having to make all these decisions to go, oh, you know what, actually I should maybe run this by this
Mhm.
person,
Yeah.
or pull this person in, or etc.
So good. Okay. I like to end on a high note. So we've talked about the fact that this is really hard to get done.
Mhm.
Leaders are probably messing it up most of the time because we're chasing all the shiny objects. Individual contributors are trying to make a name for themselves. They're trying to figure out their way in the path in the organization. We're not collaborating well. Okay, we get that. And we have some areas that we can improve on. I think some areas of intentionality, documentation, tooling, processes, some areas for improvement. All that being said, you look across the industry and you look across all the folks that you've been talking to or all the things you've been thinking about recently. What's getting you excited as you at the horizon? What's ahead?
What is the beautiful sunset that I'm looking at right now? Oh boy. I do think that it's very cool to me that we're even having conversations like this now.
Mm,
It does feel though that just the overall culture, and I think that's it's partially born of the early, very millennial driven startup culture of beer Fridays. There even though that is it's kind of a lame trope now. That really gave birth to this idea of a more flat, more psychologically safe,
yep.
more inclusive culture that really makes space for collaboration, which I think is so foundational to the whole remote thing ever working out in the long run. Um, I think it's so important to build really strong relationships between teams. And I'm really loving that we're moving away from this kind of like almost monarch like structure that we had before where the top dog is their word is bond, and orders come from above and you don't question or talk back, and there's a very org chart where their
Mhm.
folks are in their position and that's your subordinate or whatever. I like that work culture now has started to get more collaborative in that way where we are feeling increasingly free to give feedback to peers and to leadership. I think that we're still not quite rid of some of those norms that sort of have left over from the old way of doing things, but the younger the organizations get, and the more we see kind of this evolution of product culture as remote organizations and striving to kind of always be a better organization for the people, not just for the products that we're delivering to customers.
Yeah,
I'm very heartened to see where that's going.
I agree. I completely agree. I think again, we're seeing an intentionality of both focusing on the outcomes and the people involved. That's why this podcast is called People Product, right? It's because
Mhm.
it's people first, ultimately, that are aligning to create products for sure. But if we're not, if we forget about the people in the process, we miss the mark.
I mean, what are we doing, right? What's the point of having a business?
Why even do it? Yeah, I love that. I love that. Hannah, this has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And thank you for all the work that you're doing, both at the podcast and all the work that things you're thinking about around and outside the podcast. It's been a joy to be a part of your podcast and also to kind of support it over the years. But also, if you haven't, and I need to do that for you, roll out the red carpet for you. Where can people learn more about what you're working on, who you are, or where they can find out your projects?
Oh, wow. That's so hot ones of you. Um, well, I would love for
I
folks to
love
visit
that
us.
you caught, hold on. We have to pause on that. I love that you caught that because I totally stole that from Hot Ones.
Yeah, that's very Sean Evans.
It
But
so is.
if you're going to rip it off any interviewer,
He's
that's the guy
amazing.
to do it.
Okay,
He's the
okay.
best.
So let's do it. It's over to you.
So I'd love if folks could visit us at theproductmanager.com. We put a lot of love and heart into our resources for product people. We really try to be the resource for product people that's not boring. It's all very irreverent. It's a lot of fun. You can also check me out on the Product Manager podcast. We're now doing weekly episodes. We talk to a lot of awesome people, all varying experience levels, lots to share. We try to keep that lots of fun for folks as well and lots of actionable tips there. And then for myself, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. You can just search for Hannah Clark, product manager. I'll probably come up. And yeah, I try to respond to DMs as much as I can.
Hannah, you're awesome. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for all that you do. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Love that. Thanks so much, George.
People of Product is brought to you by Crema, a design consultancy that helps forward-thinking leaders discover, understand, and execute on their greatest opportunities. Learn more at crema.us.